She had eaten every dinner alone for nearly 3 years, until tonight, when an 8-year-old black boy quietly pulled out the chair beside her, and before he could even sit, a white woman at the other end of the table slammed her palm down and screamed, "Get that boy away from this table. He doesn't belong here." If this already made your blood boil, tap like, and subscribe so you don't miss stories where justice finally wins. Victoria Whitfield froze with her fork halfway to her mouth, the candlelight flickering across her pale, stunned face. The long mahogany table stretched across the silent dining room, polished so perfectly it reflected every trembling movement. For years, she had eaten here alone, this enormous space built for 16 people, and yet always filled with the same suffocating quiet. But tonight was different. Malik, the small black boy who followed his mother to work every afternoon, had shyly stepped toward the empty seat beside her. His little hands clutched a napkin he'd folded himself. His eyes held that soft politeness children use when they hope they're not causing trouble. He whispered, "Ma'am, can I sit here?" Before Victoria could answer, Brooke Whitfield, her late husband's sister, shot up from the opposite end like she'd been jolted by electricity. "Absolutely not." Brooke barked, "Carmen, control your son. This is a family table, not a daycare. Remove him." Carmen rushed out the kitchen, her apron still damp from washing dishes, her face pale with embarrassment. "I'm sorry, Miss Victoria." "Malik, sweetheart, come here." Victoria lifted one hand, a small gesture, but powerful enough to freeze the entire room. "Stop right there." Carmen halted. Malik's eyes watered instantly, terrified he'd ruined something. Brooke folded her arms, smirking like justice had already been served. Victoria slowly turned her head toward Brooke, her voice calm but sharpened by something cold. "Brooke," he asked politely, "and he is welcome at my table." Brooke's jaw dropped. "Welcome? Victoria, have you lost your mind? You're letting him sit beside you? What will the neighbors think? What will the family think?" Victoria cut a piece of salmon, unfazed. "The family," she said softly, "hasn't visited me in years. But Malik, he visits every day." Brooke's face twisted. "You're making a mistake. A serious one." Malik sat down slowly, his small legs dangling off the chair, and for the first time in years, Victoria felt something warm settle in her lonely dining room. Brooke didn't see it that way. Her eyes narrowed, calculating, venomous, because in that single moment, she felt her power slipping. And she wasn't going to let that happen, not without starting a war. The house was unusually quiet the next morning. Soft winter light spilled to the tall windows of the Whitfield mansion, brushing over the antique cabinets and gold-framed portraits that had watched Victoria age in silence. She sat in the sunroom with her tea, the faint sound of small footsteps echoing from the hallway. Malik peeked in, holding a toy car with one missing wheel. "Miss Victoria, can I play here?" The innocence in his voice softened her breath. "Of course, Malik. This house is big enough for both of us." He ran to the carpet and began pushing the broken car in slow circles. Carmen entered a moment later, tying her hair back, her shoulders tense from the embarrassment of last night. "I'm really sorry about what happened," she said softly. "Brooke shouldn't have yelled like that. Malik didn't mean any harm." Victoria closed her book. "Carmen, listen to me. Your son did nothing wrong. Brooke behaved like someone who's afraid of losing control, not someone who cares about this family." Carmen lowered her eyes. She had worked in wealthy homes for most of her life. This wasn't the first time she heard comments like Brooke's, but last night had cut deeper. Maybe because Malik had been the target. Maybe because he had been happy, truly happy, just to sit beside someone who didn't treat him like an inconvenience. Victoria studied Carmen's trembling hands. "Does Brooke bother you often?" Carmen hesitated, then nodded. She asked strange questions. About your health, about your routines, about your will. Her voice fell to a whisper. She even asked if you still remember things clearly. Victoria's expression stiffened. "How many times has she asked you that?" 3, maybe 4. The air thickened. Victoria wasn't naive. She knew why Brooke suddenly cared so much. Money. inheritance, control. But the thought that Brooke had made Carmen feel small and had frightened Malik stirred something in her chest that had been asleep since her husband died. From the living room, Malik spoke. "Ms. Victoria, look, I fixed the wheel." He lifted the toy car proudly, the missing wheel now replaced with a bottle cap he'd taped on. The creativity, the sweetness, the effort, all of it made Victoria smile for the first time that morning. "You're quite a clever boy," she said. Malik grinned. "Mom says broken things can still work if someone tries." Victoria's eyes lingered on him long enough for a realization to rise. She wasn't the only lonely person in this house. And Brooke wasn't the only one watching everything. Something was shifting. Something Brooke would not like. Because Malik wasn't just sitting at her table anymore. He was becoming part of her life. 3 days later, Victoria walked into her own living room and froze when she saw Brooke sitting there with a leather briefcase, a lawyer beside her, and Malik standing in the corner like he'd been caught doing something wrong. Brooke smiled, the kind of smile people wear right before they ruin someone's life, and whispered, "Victoria, we need to talk about that boy. If this happened in front of you, what would you do? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if you stand for fairness, hit subscribe." David Lancaster, the family's longtime attorney, sat stiffly on the edge of the couch. Papers were spread across the coffee table. Brooke crossed her legs and tapped the folder with 2 perfectly manicured fingers. "Victoria," she began, "there are concerns, serious ones, about the influence certain people might be having over you." Victoria didn't blink. Certain people meaning Malik, meaning his mother. Brooke snapped. "And yes, the boy too. They're getting too comfortable, too close, and you're making decisions that raise questions." Malik shrank further into the corner. Carmen reached out instinctively to protect him, but Brooke raised her voice like an alarm. "See? This is exactly what I mean. They act like they belong here." David cleared his throat. "There are clauses in the Whitfield estate regarding employees' families staying on the property. Misinterpretations could lead to legal disputes or challenges to the will." Victoria looked at him sharply. "Are you threatening me in my own home?" Brooke leaned forward. "No, darling. I'm protecting you and the family legacy. People talk. They wonder if you're thinking clearly after Robert's death, if you're vulnerable, if you're being influenced." Carmen gasped. "I've never—" Brooke cut her off. "Please, you think we can't see what's happening? A lonely widow, a cute child. You're manipulating her with sympathy." Malik's eyes filled with tears. "I'm not manipulating anyone." Brooke whirled toward him. "Don't speak unless spoken to." Victoria stood up so abruptly her chair scraped across the floor. "Enough." The room went silent. She stepped between Brooke and Malik, a subtle but unmistakable shield. "You came into my home uninvited. You accuse loyal people of manipulation. You insult a child. And for what? Money?" Brooke's smile faltered for the first time. "Be careful, Victoria. Decisions like this can make people question your stability." Victoria stared at her sister-in-law, realizing something she hadn't seen before. This wasn't concern. This wasn't family. This was the opening move of a plan Brooke had been building for years, and Victoria had just stepped into the center of it. The days after Brooke's visit felt heavier than the winter clouds hanging over the mansion. Every hallway held an echo of her threats. Every quiet corner felt like it had ears. Victoria moved through her home with a calm face, but inside, something sharp had awakened. She noticed the little things first. Brooke calling the house repeatedly, voicemails filled with forced sweetness, and once the shadow of a car parked across the street a little too long. Carmen felt the shift too. She double-checked the locks at night. She kept Malik close, even when he ran ahead with his usual excitement. But even Malik sensed something was wrong. "Ms. Victoria?" he asked one afternoon as he sat on the rug drawing superheroes. "Did I make your family mad?" Victoria set down her teacup. "No, dear. Some adults just get upset when they're losing something they never should have had." Malik tilted his head, like when someone keeps toys they don't play with. She allowed herself a small smile. Exactly like that. But the tension returned quickly. That evening, Carmen knocked on Victoria's study door, visibly shaken. "Ma'am, Brooke was talking to someone outside the house earlier. A man I've never seen." He gave her a folder. She walked away smiling. Victoria closed her book slowly. "Describe him." "Tall, gray coat, looked like a doctor." A cold realization slid across her mind. Brooke wasn't just gossiping. She wasn't just pressuring. She was building a case. And Victoria knew exactly the kind of people who would help her do it. The kind who wore expensive suits and carried blank evaluation forms ready to be filled with lies. Later that night, Victoria stood by the window overlooking the garden. Malik was below, running in circles with the little flashlight she had given him. He laughed every time the beam hit the snow, delighted that the world could glow with such simple magic. But then he tripped, just a small stumble, and dropped the flashlight. The batteries scattered. The beam flickered. He sat up quickly, embarrassed, rushing to gather the pieces. "I can fix it," he whispered. Watching him, Victoria felt something tighten in her chest. Malik wasn't just a boy caught in the crossfire. He was a reason Brooke felt threatened. He was a reason Brooke was willing to destroy anyone in her way. Because Malik represented something Brooke could never control. Kindness, connection, family that formed naturally, not by blood, not by money, but by choice. And Brooke would do anything to crush that. Victoria exhaled slowly as Malik rebuilt the flashlight piece by piece. If Brooke wanted a war, she was about to get one. The next morning, Victoria opened her front door and found a single envelope on the welcome mat. No name, no stamp, just one sentence written in rushed handwriting. "She's trying to declare you unfit. Protect yourself." Victoria looked up at the security camera above the door and whispered, "So she really thinks I'm not prepared." If you believe talent can silence every insult, share this video. And to everyone watching from the US, UK, and Canada, your voice matters. Victoria stepped back inside, the envelope still warm from the sunlight. Carmen stood in the hallway, clutching a basket of laundry. What is that?" Victoria unfolded the second page. A name, a phone number, a note. "This doctor's done this before." Carmen covered her mouth. "Brooke hired someone." Victoria nodded. "A psychiatrist willing to write whatever she needs." For a moment, the house felt painfully small, as if Brooke's shadow stretched through every doorway. But then Victoria walked toward her study, her expression changing from fear to strategy. "Carmen," she said softly, "I need you to call the investigator whose number I gave you. Tell him it's urgent." Carmen blinked. You already hired someone?" 3 days ago," Victoria replied. "I knew Brooke wouldn't stop. I knew she would escalate. So I made sure we were not the ones who would be caught unprepared." At that exact moment, Malik ran in with the notebook Victoria had given him last week. "Ms. Victoria, look, I wrote down the license plates that come to the house a lot. That gray car comes every day." Victoria froze. "You wrote them all down?" Malik nodded proudly. "You said real detectives pay attention." Carmen stared at her son, stunned. "Baby, why didn't you tell me you saw that car again?" Malik shrugged. "I thought maybe you were busy. So I wrote everything so you wouldn't forget." Victoria knelt beside him, her heart swelling at the quiet brilliance in his small act. "Malik, you just did something very important." Just then, her phone buzzed. The investigator's voice came through the speaker. "Ms. Whitfield, your hunch was correct. The doctor your sister-in-law met with has a history of falsifying evaluations. And Brooke has been asking around aggressively about the legal process for involuntary psychiatric admission. Carmen's knees weakened. She wants to have you taken away?" Victoria exhaled slowly. "She wants control. Nothing more." She stood up, calmer than she'd been in days. "Tell me everything you found," she said to the investigator, "and record every conversation from now on." Her voice carried a quiet edge, because Brooke wasn't the only one preparing paperwork anymore. Victoria was preparing something stronger, the truth, and she was about to use it. The storm broke on a Friday afternoon. Victoria was in the kitchen helping Malik pour syrup on his pancakes when the doorbell erupted through the house. Carmen peeked through the window, and her face drained of all color. MS. Victoria, she's here. With people. Victoria wiped her hands calmly and walked the foyer. Through the glass, she saw Brooke standing on the porch, chin lifted in triumph. Beside her was the same gray-coated doctor, and two paramedics holding an empty stretcher. Brooke didn't wait to be invited. She pushed inside with the confidence of someone who believed the battle was already won. "Victoria," she announced loudly, "the time has come. You're not well, and for your own safety, Dr. Harlan will be taking you for evaluation." The doctor stepped forward, rehearsed concern dripping from his voice. "Ms. Whitfield, based on report of erratic behavior, isolation, confusion, and inappropriate attachments." "Inappropriate attachments," Brooke repeated dramatically, "to a child who has no place here." Malik flinched behind Carmen. Victoria tilted her head. "Doctor, repeat that diagnosis, word for word." Dr. Harlan cleared his throat. "You require immediate psychiatric." A soft chime interrupted him, the sound of Victoria tapping her tablet. Then his own voice echoed through the room. "If the payment is in cash, I can write whatever she needs. Premature cognitive decline, undue influence, early instability. You tell me the story, I'll sign it." Brooke's face collapsed. Where did you get that?" Victoria stepped closer, her voice steady. "My investigator sat in the next room of your clinic. Thin walls, loud mouths." The paramedics froze, exchanging horrified glances. Victoria tapped again. This time, Brooke's voice filled the foyer. "If we get her admitted for even 72 hours, we can challenge the will. That boy and his mother will lose everything." Carmen gasped. Malik grabbed her leg, trembling. "And one more," Victoria said calmly. Brooke lunged forward. "No!" But it was too late. Another recording. "I don't care if she screams. I want her out of that house." The house fell silent. Even the air seemed to stop moving. Victoria faced the doctor. "You falsified evaluations in 2 other states. You lost your license there. You won't bury this mistake." Dr. Harlan stuttered. I didn't." She pointed to the front door. "Leave, before the police arrive. They already have your name." The doctor stumbled backward and nearly tripped over the stretcher as he fled. The paramedics followed immediately, eager to escape. That left Brooke shaking with rage. "You can't do this to me," she hissed. "I'm family." Victoria stepped closer, her voice soft and lethal. "You stop being family the moment you weaponize racism and greed against a child." Brooke opened her mouth to argue, but the sound of police sirens cut her off. Victoria didn't look away from her as she whispered, "You try to take my freedom and his innocence." The door opened. Officers stepped inside. "And now," Victoria finished, "you will lose everything you try to steal." Brooke's scream echoed through the hall as the handcuffs closed. Spring arrived slowly over the Whitfield estate, softening the air, brightening the windows, and washing away the winter shadows that had lingered for far too long. The mansion, once cold and echoing, now carried a different kind of sound: laughter, footsteps, and the quiet comfort people who finally felt safe. Victoria sat on the back porch in her lavender sweater, watching Malik race across the garden with a kite she'd helped him build. The wind lifted it high, and he shouted her name just to make sure she was looking. "Ms. Victoria, look how high it goes." She smiled, genuinely, the kind of smile she hadn't felt since before her husband died. "Higher, Malik. Run a little faster." Carmen stepped outside with 2 glasses of iced tea. She sat beside Victoria, releasing a slow breath she had been holding for years. "I still can't believe it," Carmen whispered. "That it's over." "It's over because you were brave," Victoria replied, "and because your son has the eyes of someone who sees things other people ignore." Carmen blinked back tears. "He just wanted to help." "And he did," Victoria said softly. "He helped save us all." Malik's kite dipped for a moment, then soared again. He laughed as he chased it, the sunlight catching his cheeks, The same little boy who had walked into a room and unknowingly changed the course of an entire family's destiny. A week after Brooks' arrest, the investigators confirmed everything. The bribed doctor, the forged reports, the conspiracy to seize the estate. The charges were serious: fraud, coercion, elder abuse by deception. Brooks' social circle abandoned her instantly. The people who once praised her now pretended they had never known her. Victoria didn't celebrate her downfall. She didn't have to. Justice itself had been enough. Instead, she focused on rebuilding something she had never expected to find: a family. Malik ran toward her, breathless. "Ms. Victoria, I have something for you." He held out a small drawing, the three of them standing together in front of the mansion, smiling, with the word "my family" written in uneven crayon letters. Victoria's chest tightened. She pulled him into her arms, her voice warm and steady. "You are home here, Malik. Both of you are." Carmen wiped her eyes, unable to speak. The mansion that once echoed with silence now felt complete, not because of wealth, not because of legacy, but because love, in the simplest, purest form, had finally filled the empty spaces. If stories like this remind you why dignity matters, share this video and subscribe for more dark truths.